Yo, what's up, guys? Whoa, hold on. That shouldn't be like that. There we go, that's better. What's going on, chat? Just doing a little bit of a live streaming, talking about Sickles. Uh, is that still echoing? There we go. I'll mute it like that. Yeah, just talking about my boy Sickles. I think he's a rather fascinating dude. I just figured that, just finished this awesome book, Sickles, the American Scoundrel, and it was a pretty incredible read. So highly recommend you check it out. So just hang out, ask questions. What's going on, D Reaction? How you doing? Trying to get a little bit more into live streaming and stuff here. Just haven't really had the time to edit videos. I guess I could take the time to edit a video instead of live streaming, but here I am. Yo, what's going up, Lord Skeletor? Good to see you, man. So yeah, I wanted to talk about Sickles. Fascinating dude. Oh, I'm doing great, man. How are you doing? Oh, what's up, Dustin? Good to see you, man. Good to see you in the chat. That's awesome. Yeah, I did my last oh my gosh, did my last John Brown video, and man, like, put a lot of research into it. Thought I had something good going, and it like got 100 views in the week since I put it out. So I was like, oh man, so disheartening because John Brown is like one of my all-time favorite historical figures. Oh, so good to see you, Paul. Hope all's going well. David, living on a giant farm, man. That is the life, right? I love that. That's so good, man. Yeah, so I just moved to Pittsburgh about a month ago, and it is so wild because I grew up around all these farm fields and stuff, and like everything's all flat and very just, rural. And I moved to Pittsburgh, and like this city is nothing but hills. Like my car's engine is like whining every time it has to go up a hill. It's pretty wild. But yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm originally from Gettysburg. Grew up in a little town called Hanover, maybe like 10 miles from Gettysburg. Um, but yeah, so this has been a bit of a culture shock. There's like very little Civil War history here in Pittsburgh. Like there's the Allegheny Arsenal. There's some other really cool stuff. Um, but like it's all like Rev War and a just a huge amount of French and Indian War. Like Fort Necessity is like an hour south of here. So it's some really cool stuff. Um, but yeah, I enjoy it so far. It's a lot of fun. The accident. Dun dun dun. Love it. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of do this live stream, talk about Dan Sickles, like I said. And we can talk about anything you want, bring anything up, American history. I'm here for it, man. Um, but yeah, Dan Sickles read this book, and Sickles was involved in so much stuff that I didn't realize he was involved in. He had a part in forming Central Park, which was pretty wild when he was in the New York Assembly. Um, there was this big court case involving these landowners and Dan Sickles, and it became this big to do. So Dan Sickles actually was able to influence, I think it was the New York Congress, to put another judge uh, in spot in the spot. He opened up another judiciary spot, a magistrate spot in the city. Sickles was able to get one of his buddies from the Capitol into that spot, and then kind of rigged this court case to get Central Park founded, which is just hilarious. There's pure Dan Sickles energy, right? Um, oh yeah, it has been the 250th of the Rev War. That's pretty incredible. Part of the cliff from my dog walk. For real? That's crazy, man. Sorry to hear that. That sucks. Hope your dog's okay. 854 meters. That's like not good. That's that's wild. Sorry to hear that. Yeah, I guess he wouldn't be. That's quite a drop. Ooh. Yeah, he did do a lot for veterans. He did. Sickles did a lot for veterans. Oh no, you're fine. No, I'm sorry to hear about your dog. That's pretty sad. Sickles definitely was super influential for veterans. Yeah, he was involved with the New York Monument Association. If you go, I mean, Dustin, you've gone to battlefields all over the country, Civil War battlefields. And, New York usually has the biggest, bougiest monument. If there's monuments at a battlefield, New York probably has the biggest, bougiest one. And part of that in part of that was from Dan Sickles. The other thing at Gettysburg is if you look at the Excelsior Monument, it was originally supposed to be a bust of Dan Sickles' head in the middle. You can actually see it looks like a pedestal there. Um, that was supposed to be a bust of Dan Sickles' head, but Dan Sickles embezzled these 28,000 some dollars. It was like 1898, late 1800s, early 1900s, that he embezzled all that money. And here he is. He's he's very, very old. It might even be a little bit later, 1910, something like that. But here he is. Dan Sickles is super, super old. And he's getting sued. The controller that found the irregularities in the book, in the accounting books, like he felt terrible, So this guy, he's like I'm really, really sorry that we found this. He goes so far as to, start to raise funds for Dan Sickles' legal defense and to help pay the money back. Like the dude felt terrible from it. It was actually a pretty interesting story. Sickles, I mean, He's I've often compared him to, and this is kind of a controversial hot take, if you will, but I've compared him to the Donald Trump of the 19th century. Just, I mean, scandal after scandal, and still comes back more popular than ever. A rather incredible individual. I mean, even if we just look at his rise through the ranks. Like he was a political appointee. He rose up through the ranks. He was super super tight with Miss Lincoln. Him and Mary Todd. I mean, they would hang out so much to the point that certain newspapers and certain tabloids at the time, they were making all these like wild accusations. Um, and it was just pretty incredible. Like he had Lincoln's ear, and it was wild. Um, so he rose through the ranks. Eventually, he gets up to major generals in charge of the Third Corps. He's at Chancellorsville. He sees what happens to the 11th Corps at Chancellorsville, and they're out there on the flank. Jackson, again, he marches all around. Now, mind you, Sickles, he sees Jackson's men marching around at Chancellorsville, reports it. Nothing ever comes of it, which really frustrates Sickles. So Jackson marches around, hits the 11th Corps, sends them back. They get the unfortunate designation as the Flying Dutchman at Chancellorsville, the 11th Corps. Again, the 11th Corps consisted mostly of like German, Polish, Lithuanian, a lot of huge Eastern European and Central European immigrants were in that corps. They're going to fall back at Chancellorsville. Sickles, he's out there on Hazel Grove, which is an area that's maybe half mile, three quarters of a mile, kind of forward. And he's actually kind of splitting the Confederate army in half at one point at Chancellorsville. Hooker, of course, a cannonball hits the Chancellor's mansion. They think he is concussed or somehow injured. Hooker's going to draw Sickles back, basically consolidate the Union forces. Sickles hates to see that Hazel Grove, which really was the only elevated geographical location at the Chancellorsville battlefield of note, he really hates to see that spot be given up. By the time he pulls back from that spot, the Confederates, they put 30 some cannons on Hazel Grove. And if you've ever been to Hazel Grove, like, it's not that big a spot. So I mean, the Confederates just swarm this elevated knob, this hill. Again, we're not even talking like a little round top size of elevation or anything like that. Like, it's pretty insignificant, but significant enough that it means a lot to whoever takes it. They go ahead, they put their cannons on there, and they just pound, pound, pound away at the Union Army, while the later days of Chancellorsville kind of fizzle out. We get to Gettysburg. Sickles again. He's going to be in the Third Corps, commanding the Third Corps. We have action on the first day. Sickles is kind of dilly-dallying around Emmitsburg. Reynolds, he sends off for the Third Corps before he's unfortunately shot. And, the entire Gettysburg campaign, Sickles is just really dragging his ass. Meade's giving him a hard time about it. Also, if you think the Wheatfield action would have occurred, or at least something on a smaller scale, had Sickles not moved up. No, Dustin, at that point, and I love tangents, so I'm going to go off on a tangent here. If we look at Gettysburg, and I do have my Leno map book here. If we look at Gettysburg, Sickles' original position, all right, this is going to be terrible, and I'm going to try to do this in reverse. But Sickles' position, okay. So we have Little Round Top and stuff here. So this is like Little Round Top down here. This is Cemetery Hill up here, Sickles would have pretty much created a straight line connecting onto the left of the Second Corps, probably somewhere in this area here, which would be like the modern day Pennsylvania Monument. Sickles, now this is 6:45 on day 2, so this isn't quite an accurate map. But Sickles, he moves his guys forward. So the wheat field, the Confederates were just rolled through the wheat field. And I mean, it's one of those great Gettysburg what ifs. Had Sickles not moved his men forward, I don't feel we would have had Wheatfield, Devil's Den, the Stony Ridge, Stony Hill, kind of where that loop is that goes around there, where the Irish Monument is. We probably wouldn't have had any of those actions. Like, I still think a Little Round Top would have come into play because Sickles' left flank, which would have been the far left at that time, would have started to just rest on the northern slope of Little Round Top. So his men probably would have been in that little saddle there, where you come down Little Round Top, and you go up that other small knoll, that Munchauer's knoll there. There's I think it's like the Sedgwick Monument is there. You would have come up, his left would have been in that area. So you would have seen a lot more action down there in kind of that low ground as you're heading on that road towards the Pennsylvania Monument, towards the first Minnesota Monument. But again, when Longstreet eventually makes his way around, he wasn't really expecting to see the Third Corps there. So that's such a good springboard, and that's such a good question too. It's one of those great Gettysburg what ifs, but it's such a good springboard into this bravado attitude that Sickles has, that like, hey, I won the Battle of Gettysburg. If I hadn't moved my troops forward, then they would have just steamrolled us and rolled us up by the flank. And that's actually what Sickles is going to kind of the idea he's going to put forward. So he gets, of course, shot in the leg, amputated above the knee, loses his leg. His leg, you can still go visit. He would visit it every year on the anniversary of the battle if he could. Um, he loses his leg, um, goes back to Washington to heal and stuff, and then he starts spreading his version of events to essentially anyone in power that would listen to him. He would start spreading his events. He never puts out an official report, but there is a report by a character named Historicus who provides a letter to a bunch of newspapers. The letter is just incredibly, damning Meade, everything Meade did, um, using Meade's Pipe Creek Circular as evidence that Meade was going to retreat at Gettysburg. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Calling Meade a coward, all this kind of stuff. Whereby this historicist person is also putting forth this idea that Sickles was determined to fight. Sickles was the hero of Gettysburg. You get what I'm saying? So it's yes, he screws Meade over hugely at the Board of Inquiry. It's not to say that Meade is without fault, but I am a huge fan of Meade. There's a book, Meade at Gettysburg, that really puts into perspective just the amount of work Meade did in those 5 days, 3 days that he was in command before the Battle of Gettysburg took place. 3 days. Um, I mean, the amount of work that Meade did. And we're talking about stuff that we don't even think about. Like, he was starting to condense all the troops, of course. He was starting to condense all the troops into northern Maryland, that Frederick County, Carroll County area, that Pipe Creek line. They start to creep up around Frederick. They kind of spread out to Westminster, Union Mills, those areas. But also, he starts to repair a lot of telegraph wires. He starts to do a lot of the logistical stuff that armies in the Civil War, like that kind of stuff, led to successful campaigns. All the logistics, the railroad lines, again, the telegraph lines, the cavalry scouting, the procurement of supplies. Like he did it all. And in a matter of 3 days, what he did is just absolutely incredible. And it's one of those untold stories of the Gettysburg campaign and really one of the overlooked actions of the American Civil War. Like it's just absolutely fascinating how far Meade went leading up to the Gettysburg campaign. So Sickles, he moves his troops forward. Of course, we have the action in the wheat field. The wheat field was never a tenable position. It's the entire line. Of course, he creates a salient. He has one division out there on the Emmitsburg Road. He has another stretching down to Devil's Den. Um, just not a tenable line at all. He makes a salient, and it's so hard. His men are spread so thin. He only has 9,800, 10,000 men or so in his corps, in the third corps at the time. I mean, they just came off of Chancellorsville. You had a lot of soldiers, contracts and stuff. They're running out very quickly. They're about to end. Um, and again, the Union Army just faced one of its biggest defeats of the entire war. So it's tough for um, it's tough going right now for the Army of the Potomac. Meanwhile, Lee, his army, they're riding high. They just came off Second Bull Run. They just came off, not that long, about a year before you have like the 7 days campaign, the 7 days battles, the Peninsula campaign, where I mean the North was right on the doorstep of Richmond and they beat them back. You have Antietam, which was a draw, but still they're not disheartened. You have Fredericksburg, which was just a one-sided massacre. There's only really one point in the Battle of Fredericksburg where the North even came close to winning that battle. And then, of course, you have Chancellorsville, which is often described as Lee's greatest victory of the American Civil War, Lee's masterpiece. So they're riding high. The morale is through the roof, and they get to Gettysburg. It's really the South has more men than it's ever had in its army. It's really Lee's battle to lose. Um, Sickles moves his men up forward, and this big action occurs. You have the wheat field where there's over 27 square acres, and there's 20 some brigades that will see action in the wheat field. You have the Stony Hill where there's a lot of just terrible fighting going on there. You have, the peach orchard itself. There's a lot of artillery action there. There's, of course, Barksdale's Mississippians just sweeping the field. It's just an incredible whirlwind of destruction, and it never really was a tenable position unless they had days to dig in, entrench, fortify, what have you. Like, it's just not in the North's favor at that point. Excuse me. But yeah, that's I love the what ifs of Gettysburg, and the more I study the Civil War in general, like I just hate to say it because everybody loves a good underdog story, despite you know all the other political stuff going on. Everybody loves a good underdog story. There's just no way the South was winning the American Civil War. There's no way the South was going to win once Meade took Cemetery Hill away. They were going to win the Battle of Gettysburg. Yesterday was 250th anniversary for Washington going to Cambridge. Oh, no way. That's pretty wild. That's cool. Yeah, my fiance is a huge Revolutionary War, French and Indian War, early American history person. Like she is, I mean, she's telling me about like the Petticoat Affair, like all this stuff I had no idea about, and so I'm just like, what? But that's awesome. Yeah, Washington is another fascinating dude. The more I learn about him out here, and just the other day we took a little road trip. We went to Jumonville Glen, Washington's like first battle in command. He was a lieutenant colonel in the British Army, the Virginian Company, I think it was. And Washington, oh man, it's such a good story. And I know I'm going to butcher some of the details, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So, feel free to fact check me. Washington's put in command because you have the forks of the Ohio River, where the Allegheny and the Monongahela River meet to form the Ohio River. Of course, if you control the Ohio, you control the Mississippi, you control the whole interior of the continent. So you have all these continental powers that are just, they are so keen on grabbing the forks of the Ohio, which is literally modern day downtown Pittsburgh. Um, all these, all these colonial powers, France, England, they're all trying to get the forks of the Ohio. So England first builds a fort. They're taken over by the French. England wants the forks of the Ohio back. So then they invade, or they're doing military actions in the area, basically to get the forks of the Ohio back, take this fort back, which is now under the French as Fort Duquesne. So Washington is set on this mission. It's basically kind of like feel out the area, see what's going on, kind of like a scouting party, see what they can do to improve this like upcoming campaign. Washington is out there. He has a message for the French, basically to say, screw off, this is ours or else. Now, the other player in this, so there's three players: France, England, and then you have the Native Americans. The natives. Oh, wow. I'll have to check that out. The Jason Russell House. Interesting. Huh. Thank you. I'll have to check that out, man. So then you have the Native Americans, and I mean, of course, within the Native Americans, there's all these little factions. So you have this guy, Tenagreason, right? Tenagreason, also known as Half King, he kind of is on the outskirts of being favorable amongst the Native Americans, the tribes that are operating in the area. And eventually, those tribes kind of just get sick of him and they say, dude, get out of here. So, him and like 80 of his followers are kind of, floating around, if you will. He sees that the British are operating in the area and says, hey, these guys are pretty strong. Let's get on board with them. We're sick of the French. We're sick of the other natives. Like, let's see what these British guys are all about. So, in order to kind of gain favor, Tanacreson, the half king, he approaches Washington and says, like, hey, no, you're not huge, big fans of the French. There's a bunch of French dudes just kind of hanging out not far from here. I can take you there to see them. So they plan this ambush at this place called Jumonville Glen. And it's a beautiful, beautiful area. There's these huge rock outcroppings, really nice trail. The National Park Service owns that land, and it's just a really, really neat spot. So Washington and the other natives, they surround these Frenchmen, right? And the story kind of gets muddy. We're not sure who fires first, whether the British fire first, the French spot an Englishman and they fire first, whatever. But either way, this fight happens. The French lose. Many of them are taken prisoner. And then there's a gentleman named Charles de de Colon Jumonville. I know the last like three names of his name. I can't forget I forget if he's a Charles or a Joaquin or something like that. But anyway, this Jumonville guy, he gets wounded. Tanacreson takes it upon himself to scalp him and kill him. Now, Jumonville is the leader of the French party. Washington is kind of like awestruck and also like oh crap, like we weren't trying to do all this, guys. Like this is like some pretty extra stuff. Yo, I'll see you later, man. Have a good one. Thanks for stopping in. Appreciate it. So Jumonville is kind of, or Washington's like, oh man, like I don't think I was supposed to kill that dude. Like I was just supposed to send him a message. Like crap, crap, crap. Washington goes. He goes to this place called the Great Meadows, starts to build this fort, this really ramshackle fort, Fort Necessity. Meanwhile, the French, Jumonville's brother, starts to get a big band of Frenchmen and natives, and they decide that they're going to attack Washington at Fort Necessity. And basically, the English are surrounded. The English might have like 300 guys. The French have like 900 guys. They're firing from the woods. This fort is built in the middle of a valley, surrounded by trees. Again, it's real ramshackle. They have one little like grasshopper 3-pound cannon on a swivel. Like they're outnumbered and outgunned. Washington surrenders. Then Washington is given the terms of surrender from the French. Washington doesn't know French. Washington's interpreter is a Dutchman who barely knows French. Not enough to be fluent, certainly not enough to be wheeling and dealing in international, interlanguage, political terms of surrender. So he says, yeah, George, looks good. You can sign off on it. Washington signs off on it. Well, turns out that what Washington signed off on was an agreement that he had ordered the assassination of Jumonville. So now an international assassination is now a casus belli for war. This fires off the French and Indian War, which then further fires off, the 7 Years' War, which, I mean, really is like a World War Zero. Like, it's such a big battle. It takes place in so many theaters. Of course, Europe, Prussia gets involved, Austria gets involved. There's fights in India, in the colonies out there. Of course, there's, the French and Indian War going on here in the United States. And eventually, from fighting this war, the United States and England, they just rack up, well, it wasn't even the United States, the colonies and England, they rack up such a huge debt that eventually England says, hey, like, maybe you guys can help pay for this debt. We tell them, no, and it kind of steamrolls into, snowballs into the American Revolution. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but we're a little far from Sickles at this point, but it is such a, like I just love talking about American history. It's fascinating. It really is such a fascinating, just subject. So Sickles, we're at Sickles at Gettysburg. Sickles was wounded, kind of shit talks Meade a whole bunch, says, Meade did this, Meade was a coward, Meade didn't want to fight Gettysburg, I should take all the credit, blah, blah, blah. Sickles again goes to the war. Um, he's wounded. He doesn't have he's missing a leg. It was amputated. So he eventually just kind of doesn't really do a whole lot of military action after the war, or for the remainder of the war. Now, after the war, he becomes military governor of first South Carolina, and Sickles loves this. He sees it as a challenge. He says, South Carolina was like the ground zero for this insurrectionist rebellion, Confederate activity. It's where it all started. Fort Sumter, of course, like, yeah, put me in charge. I got this. Ooh. And you know what, Dogface? There is a whiskey rebellion celebration happening. We also have a lot of whiskey rebellion stuff, which is another really neat subject of American history because like here's our entire country. We fought against taxes we thought were unfair, and then these guys say like, no, like we're not going to pay taxes on whiskey. That's a they're using it as a form of currency. Really, a lot of these farmers. And said, no, we're not going to pay taxes on that. So the government that just fought a war because of taxes, what they considered unfair taxes, they now put down a rebellion based over unfair taxes. So it's really, really an interesting thing. But yeah, there's a whiskey rebellion celebration happening. Oh my goodness. I guess it's about a week or so now, next weekend, out in this area in Washington County. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It looks like a good event. We might try to hit that up, see what it's all about, see what kind of fun historical trouble we can get into. Maybe there'll be some whiskey. Who knows? But yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I need to get up there. I'd like to see like the oh my gosh, what is that bridge that they have there? It's a very iconic bridge. Like I know it from Fallout 4 because I played Fallout 4 for hundreds and hundreds of hours. Um, like what is that? The opening shot heard around the world park or Minutemen Militia Park or something like that. Yeah, I really want to. I'd love to get out there and check that out. So back into our boy Sickles. Yes, Northbridge. That's the one. Thank you. Dark Angel. Why is Mr. Peacemaker Trump becoming an universal clown day after day? Oh man. I don't think I have a poll long enough to touch that question. That's tough. That's tough. I don't think any man, I don't envy anyone that is president. That's a tough job. That's a tough job. Some people make it probably tougher on themselves too. So yeah. So our boy Sickles, he's a military governor for South Carolina after the war. He does a fair job. He has a fair reputation. There's some things that go well, and there's some things that don't go well for Sickles. But it goes well enough that he eventually takes over the governorship for North Carolina as well. So he's kind of this combined North Carolina uh, military governor, if you will. Um, and he does a good job, but then you get into the election of 1876, where Reconstruction is kind of unofficially put at an end. Sickles then becomes an ambassador. No. What does Sickles becomes? He's not an ambassador. He he does a lot of, sorry, not an ambassador, but he does do a lot of traveling through South America for the United States government. He goes over to Spain for the United States government. Eventually, Sickles is going to meet the deposed Queen Isabella. Now, Sickles at this point, Teresa Baggioli, his first wife, had died from tuberculosis, from consumption of what they called it at the time. She passed away. Sickles is a ladies' man, whole 9 yards. He's eventually going to, I don't know what that is. guys, give me 1 second here. Alrighty. Alrighty. Sorry about that, friends. Is that his strategy? What is his strategy to make America great again? What are you referring to, Dark Angel? So yeah, Sickles. While I wait, we'll get back on Sickles. Sickles, he gets in, um, and he starts to see this French woman, um, declares her name, marries her. Meanwhile, he is having a affair with the Queen of Spain, or the deposed Queen of Spain, Queen Isabella. So like his whole life is just filled with all these crazy, crazy controversies. Um, and I started kind of weird. I started in the middle of the Sickles story. I started with Sickles in the Civil War, which was a weird place to start because we lost a lot of really, really fascinating lead up into his life. Dan Sickles, New York congressman, Tammany Hall backed Democrat. He is a bit of a ladies' man, a lawyer, just a fascinating dude, a dude that is, involved in all kinds of stuff in New York politics. Sickles starts to woo this very young, we're talking 15, 16 years old, Teresa Baggioli. She is the daughter of a opera trainer, I believe. Sickles woos her. She is, described as like one of the most beautiful women in all the land, blah, 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 whole 9 yards. Um, and for some reason, uh, a lot of first and second person accounts um, deem it appropriate to mention how she was very well developed for her age. I suppose that does add some context on how much of a cat she is, I guess, whole 9 yards, but it's kind of weird because they're also describing like a 15, 16-year-old girl. Anyway, Sickles and Teresa, they marry, have a child named Laura, but Teresa, as they move to Washington, because, Sickles is a congressman now at the national level for New York, Teresa moves to Washington, and through all of the social circles and everything, the socialite scene, she is introduced to Philip Barton Key, the son of Francis Scott Key, writer of the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. They start to have this illicit affair. And, they even go so far as Philip Barton Key renting this house, and he would put a certain, candle in the window or whatever. He would drive by Teresa and Dan's house, and if Teresa was free, she would look out the window waiting for him, always around a certain time of day, and she would wave a red handkerchief to let him know, hey, Dan's out of town. Let's do our thing here, big boy. So, it's this illicit affair. It's going on, and it's not really a secret to the friends and associates that are within this socialite circle in DC, but it's a secret to Dan. Meanwhile, Dan himself, again, he is a womanizer. Dan is frequenting houses of ill repute. He's involved with this madam named Fanny White. In fact, he even goes so far as to, when he was working as an assistant to James Buchanan, who was ambassador to the United Kingdom, Great Britain at the time, as he's working with James Buchanan, he takes Fanny White over to England with him and introduces Fanny White to the Queen of England, to Queen Victoria, introducing her using the surname of one of his political opponents as an insult not only to England, because Dan is very much anti England, like, go America. On the 4th of July, Dan would be out there chugging Budweisers, waving flags, and shooting off fireworks. So Dan is all about America. He introduces this Fanny White, this madam, to the Queen of England under the surname of one of his political rivals, as a dig to his rival and as a dig to England. So anyway, Teresa Baggioli, she's involved meanwhile with Philip Barton Key. They're starting to get not as careful as they once were. Again, this is kind of a not so secret, but they're starting to get rather brave with it. They're starting to get rather bold with it. Well, one day Dan receives an anonymous letter saying, "Hey, I know what Teresa and Key are up to. I thought you should want to know." Dan sees this letter, reads it, like he starts to go just wild with anger and emotion at this letter. Well, it just so happens he sees Barton Key walking down the street. Dan will grab two pistols. He will go out in the street at Lafayette Square and he will shoot down Barton Key in Lafayette Square, Washington, D.C., in broad daylight. The only thing Barton Key had on him at the time, no weapons, nothing, nothing that could be used to harm Dan, nothing he could use to defend himself. All he had were opera glasses. So now we have the court trial of the century. We have the trial of the 19th century. Dan Sickles is on trial for murder. First, Dan Sickles, he's arrested and he's put into jail in Washington, D.C. But he is not treated like the other prisoners. He is treated as a extremely highly regarded guest almost. He's not forced into a cell. The warden of the jail lets Dan use his office for all his business, lets him walk around the block, unattended to. He has all kinds of visitors at all hours of the day. He's fed incredibly well. He's treated incredibly well. He's given all the creature comforts of home. Like, this is not like a jail setting for Dan, like we might imagine jail is. Dan is treated far above and beyond what any other prisoner of the time would be treated like. Day of the trial comes. Dan has an all-star lawyer team. He has Edwin Stanton. He has Thomas Mager, which is a name that, all names that us as Civil War and American history buffs should recognize. He just has an all-star cast for his lawyer team. Days and days and days of the trial go on. Dan Sickles is eventually found not guilty by temporary insanity. It's the first time that defense is successful in American history. And it is such a high-profile case. Newspaper headlines, just the whole shebang while this trial is going on is nothing but Dan Sickles and Teresa Baggioli. Dan Sickles basically says that because he was so distraught as a husband that his wife would, go out and go behind his back and be unfaithful, that, he had no other choice but to do it. He was blinded by rage and just temporarily insane. The jury buys it. They buy into what he's selling, and, that is that. He's found not guilty by temporary insanity. Dan then, this trial was over with, and then the relationship between Dan and Teresa is strained. Teresa, who was once one of the top socialites of Washington, D.C., she is now regarded as a pariah, a social pariah. Nobody wants anything to do with Teresa Baggioli. Her name is dragged through the dirt. Meanwhile, the public is just so overly sympathetic to Dan as this poor guy who was just faced with this terrible harlot of a wife, the whole 9 yards. Poor Dan, woe is me. But the true sadness, I think, in the Dan Sickles story does kind of lie with Teresa Baggioli, his wife, his first wife. Teresa's married young. She's never given really an opportunity to live life or learn life. Um, Here she was courted by this very affluent, powerful politician, probably kind of forced into this marriage in some way or another. And here comes this young, dashing Philip Barton Key. You know, he's district attorney of Washington, D.C., represents all these things that maybe she didn't have a chance at being so young. Now, as Teresa goes through life, she becomes very much a social shut in. She's no longer going to these parties. She's not invited to all these parties in DC. Even when she moves back up to New York after, everything goes on after Dan leaves Congress, she's still really not doing well. She's not invited out to things like she used to be. She eventually starts to get um, develop symptoms of tuberculosis, and consumption is what they called tuberculosis back then. And so this disease starts eating at her. So not only is now she a recluse, but her body is starting to fail her. Eventually the disease will take her in her early 30s. Now, Dan and Teresa's daughter, um, Laura, that's another fascinating thing, because another fascinating subject of this whole story, because again, Laura is a tragic figure in the story of Dan Sickles. His daughter, the relationship between her and Dan himself will become very strained, to the point that Sickles wants nothing to do with his daughter, and he will kind of cast her out off to the side to fend on her own. He might send a small stipend, a small allowance every month to her, but she's eventually forced to make little paintings in New York City and try to sell them on the street in order to scrape up money. She develops a very, very bad alcohol problem. His daughter becomes very close to her grandfather, Dan's dad. And so when Dan's dad is on his deathbed, like his dad is begging him through these letters, like, Dan, please, I don't know what happened between you and Laura, but like she's not doing well. You should probably reach out to her, try to mend this, otherwise you might not get the opportunity. And Dan scoffs at that idea. He says, I've made it very clear I want nothing to do with her. And so it's really sad. Whatever may have happened between those two at that point, where the father's not even willing to reconcile with the daughter as she's on her deathbed. She develops a really, really bad alcohol problem. She dies from basically alcoholism, is what I've read that she dies from. And it's so tragic that, and it really speaks to another part of Dan's character too, that his daughter is having all these issues, and he is out, you know, gallivanting in South America, gallivanting in Europe, starting this whole new family, and just pretending like the family he had with Teresa and his daughter is just nothing. Nothing. It's so wild. He's a fascinating dude, and just one of those characters where if you study the Civil War, like, Dan Sickles. He's almost a main character, if anything, comedic relief. But if you study American history in the broader scope, nobody really, you know, thinks about Dan Sickles. So a really fascinating dude. Really, really fascinating dude, for sure. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna hit that goal, but I put one in there anyway. Had an option for it. We'll see. Oh yeah, he was just Dan Sickles was wild, man. Absolutely wild. He just the fact, just this. I always there's just so much debate about so many aspects of Dan Sickles' life. There's debate. He won the Medal of Honor at Gettysburg, and there's even debate that he was puffing the cigar as he was carried off the field. There's just so many aspects of debate to Dan Sickles that it's pretty fascinating. Um, just to read about him. And the great thing about Sickles is that whenever you get a book about Sickles, you can tell immediately what the book is going to be like based on the title, based on the author's opinion. Like just the title alone, Dan Sickles, A Life. Dan Sickles, American Scoundrel. So almost immediately what, what the twist is going to be on the book about Sickles. Really, really neat. I love it. Just love talking about him. Really neat guy. So, Gettysburg had its 162nd anniversary. Um, Pretty wild. Here we are, 162. Missed it, of course, but I hope everyone had a wonderful time out there. I I know. So, all right, let's get on Bike Week because that's really where I'm leaning towards. You have this poor town of 7,000 people in central Pennsylvania has a huge historical based event, and then literally the next weekend is inundated with motorcycles, and it's awful. Like I'm not gonna lie, it's awful. Oh, the men back then. I mean, you there had to almost be a certain level of cruelty back talking late 1600s, early 1700s if you were going to make it in a colony. You had to have a certain level of cruelty, a certain level of selfishness. And I think that comes down to survival. If you weren't willing to fight against whatever might be out there, if you weren't willing to look out for yourself first, you weren't going to ensure your survival. It's we are so lucky and coddled in modern days with modern technology that I can sit in the comfort of an air conditioned home and the whole 9 yards. If I want a meal, I just walk 10 steps over to the refrigerator and grab what I want. If I don't have something, I just drive a half mile down to the grocery store and get it. Like, we have so many conveniences in the modern day, whereas we're talking, so like 1690s all the way up to like 60 years ago. Like, there was just such a certain level of cruelty that there had to be. And I don't say that in a mean way, I just say that there's just a certain harshness that you had to have to survive, or you weren't going to survive. Yeah. Yeah, some pretty gnarly dudes. It ultimately came down to, you know, survival of the fittest, really. Oh, I'll have to check that. Honestly, like, I'm not super familiar with King Philip's War. Um, I probably should familiarize myself with it because it does seem like a pretty fascinating conflict. I know, again, like I'm not afraid to admit my shortcomings. I know that a lot of my knowledge, my historical knowledge, really just we're talking French and Indian War is when I start to feel like fairly confident and know what I'm talking about up until like World War One. Like World War II, I have such respect for people that get in the weeds with World War II because there's just so much going on in World War II that like I get lost. Like I have all the respect in the world for the people that dive deep into World War II. That's it's just a scope of knowledge. Like I know the major actors, but like we're talking about different offensives and tactics and stuff, and I just so you're talking about Dogface. You're talking about in King Philip's War, extremely brutal fighting. No one was off limits in the killing. Whew, that sounds rough. That sounds like a pretty brutal conflict for sure. Damn. Now, were they? I mean, I have to imagine. Oh goodness. Now I gotta get on Wikipedia here because now I'm curious. I don't always use Wikipedia, but it's a good just reference period. Just reference. I don't take the Wars of the Restoration of England. King Philip's War, the First Indian War, Metacom's War, Metacomet's War, Po-Metacomet's Rebellion, or Metacom's Rebellion was an armed conflict in 1675 to 1678 between a group of indigenous peoples in the northeastern woodlands against the English New England colonies and their indigenous allies. Metacom, the Pokanoket chief, Wampanoag. Wow. Oh, wow. So we're talking like 1675. Wow. I mean, holy crap, those are pretty big armies for back then. Again, just a cursory look over Wikipedia, like, you know, strength of the natives 3,500, strength of the settlers and natives allied to the settlers 3,500. And we're talking like 3,000 and 2,000 losses. Like that's no joke. That's pretty wild. I'm actually kind of blown away by that. Interesting. You have to do some deep diving into that because that does sound fairly interesting. King Philip's War. Huh. Huh, the more you know. Fascinating stuff. That's pretty cool. I'll have to dig into that. I'll have to see what maybe the lady knows a little bit more about it than I do. Captain Beer's ambush. The Beer's ambush gravesite. Or Captain Richard Beer's 36 miles soldiers. Oh! Oh! Dang. Said his men were 36 men were ambushed by 150 natives. Dang, that's wild. Okay, at least eight other. I'm looking at. Looks like it's HMD Historical Marker Database for that one. Grave of Captain Richard Beers, killed by Indians, September 4th, 1675. It says mountainside above. Does Massachusetts have mountains? Oh wow, it's a lot of King Philip stuff going around there. Oh, well, one is like World War One memorial. There's like King Philip's Hill, first settlement. That's interesting. Yeah, another really fascinating thing I find is that a lot of the American style of fighting that we used in the Revolutionary War was based so much off of how we observed and learned from the Native Americans, like these very kind of like skirmish tactics. Um, that we really put to good use in the Revolution, and really evolved into like those like Americanized light infantry tactics, if you will. Um, I think about like Berdan's sharpshooters, just sending forth the skirmishers to kind of flesh out, feel out the enemy lines. Like all of that stuff definitely had its roots in how the Native Americans fought against the settlers, against us. It's really, really interesting, really fascinating stuff. It was a 3-day fight overall. Him and his men in the end had their heads put on stakes. Whoa. Not where I'd want my head to be. That is wild. So they were pretty brutal back then. That's wild. All right. Well, guys, I'm going to head off of here. I'll catch you later. Thanks for joining me on the stream. I'll probably try to get, I don't know, maybe one or two of these in a week. It's kind of fun. Just hanging out, talking history, kind of, I'll try to just kind of get a general topic for each time. And if we go off the rails, then we go off the rails. I'm here for it. I'm down for it. It's going to be a good time. And I'll catch you on the next one.